Hello, in this video I want to look at the first tutorial tank, the Type 5850-08. This is indeed a tutorial tank. You may not remember it, but it is, I believe, the one from the Chinese server, which I believe replaced the T-34-85, as they are almost the same tank, and on their stats in the tutorial they were very similar. So, the Type 5850-08, this tank is going to be completely free. In June you're going to be able to earn it by a free subscription that will be given out to players. And what this tank basically is almost similar to a T-34-85 Rudy or a T-43, except with a few different stats in its gun. So I'll get right into its stats. There is of course a review on my website if you do want to have a look at that without this commentary. So looking at its armor, you can see that it's actually quite good on the turret, but of course it has the typical T-34-85 hull, so there's no armor there at all. But you can see that the turret is actually quite reliable, and notably it is better than the T-34-85 Breakthrough, which is this tank. So you can see there's only two very small weak points next to the gun mantlet, and the cupola is fairly weak, but overall for the turret it is still fairly reliable, and it's quite troll to shoot at just because the weak points on the turret cheeks are quite small and the cupola is not the largest despite it being quite weak, though you do also have to watch out for this turret ring, which is only 85mm thick. You can see that of course when switching to premium ammo the turret does become weaker, but it is still very troll considering its turret cheeks take up a large portion of the turret, and the mantlet is still somewhat reliable on the upper and lower parts as long as the enemies don't hit directly next to the gun. And of course this is premium ammo, meaning that most enemies you face in your same tier 7, will have to be using premium to go through the gun mantlet, but overall quite reliable armor. You can also see that the upper plate isn't quite easy to HE 135, though Hesh of course will be going through that without any issues. When using gun depression you can also see that the armor is quite good. You do of course just have to try and hide that turret ring, so only expose as little of the turret as possible by, well, essentially not moving the gun above the ridgeline more than it needs to be. That way you will hide the lower part of the turret and only show the top area above the gun. But you can see of course with gun depression it doesn't change too much just because the turret is fairly rounded, and yeah, you can see it here. But overall not bad for armor profile. It is fairly normal for a medium tank having decent turret armor and a fairly weak hull. But in terms of the gun, this tank mounts an 85mm. Its ammo is AP, APCR and HE. Penetration 147, 195 and 45. Very normal penetration for this type of tank, this type of gun. Most 85mm guns in this tier have almost exactly this level of penetration, so this is very normal. Damage 210, 170, 330. So this gun does 10 extra damage on its standard ammo and 30 extra on its HE, compared to most normal 85mm guns which do 200 on standard and 300 on HE. It does pay for it a bit by having a worse reload time, 5.2 seconds instead of the usual 4.8, 4.6 that the 200 alpha guns at this tier generally have, but it still has pretty good DPM of 2445. Notably that is 200 less than other 85mm guns at this tier, but for tier 7 overall 2445 isn't terrible, especially considering your alpha damage is slightly higher, which does help you to trade a bit, and you can notice that 10 extra alpha a bit in battle. Next, gun handling. Aim time is very good for, well, tier 7 and most medium tanks in general. It does have just very nice aim time thanks to good base aim time and of course also good gun handling. Its dispersion isn't that impressive, but again, this is tier 7. A lot of guns in tier 7 really aren't that accurate, so 0.34 isn't actually the worst, but out of its accuracy stats, the dispersion is the least impressive aspect. Next, shell velocities are 1000, 1792, and this is actually a bug because I will just show it very quickly. You can see here shell range is 792, shell velocity is 1000. What it should actually be instead is, you can see here, changing the shell velocity, changing the shell to APCR, you can see shell range changes down to 720. 720 is the max range for all shells in the game, no matter what. So it being 792 is actually a bug. That is supposed to be the shell velocity, and you can tell by looking at the HE, which for all these tutorial tanks, they have the same AP and HE shell velocity. So it's supposed to be 792 on shell velocity, and shell range is supposed to be 720. But they sort of mixed it up a bit, it seems. But gun depression is 7 degrees around the entire tank, which is actually pretty good for when you are running away and shooting over the rear. So overall, this gun is actually pretty good. It has nice alpha, 210 is pretty nice, considering its DPM is still a decent 2445, very good aim time, decent dispersion, and good gun handling. Of course, with also very good standard shell velocity, though they might actually fix that back to being 792, which then would be pretty unimpressive, but overall a good gun. So next, moving to mobility, this tank has a good top speed, 54 km per hour, which for tier 7 is actually pretty impressive. Reverse speed is 20, also average for a medium tank. Power to weight ratio is 20.7, which is pretty good, and this tank weighs 32 tons, which, just for reference, is 2 tons less than the T-34-85 Breakthrough, while also having a slightly stronger engine. Its actual acceleration is the same on hard terrain at 20.7, traverse speed is 57.9. On medium terrain it is 15.9, which is not so impressive, but 15.9 is still a decent amount of acceleration, unlike 15, which is actually noticeably not that great. 16 is fairly usable. Traverse speed is 44.6 though, which is not good at all for a medium tank, and you do definitely notice this in battle, and you might want to change your equipment accordingly. And of course, that different mobility on medium terrain is caused by that 1.3 medium terrain resistance, which all these tutorial tanks seem to have a fairly similar trait in that terrain resistance. But overall, its mobility isn't terrible, not quite as bad as the Sherman or the T-34-85 on medium terrain, and you can actually notice that in battle. Of course, this tank does also have the same improved engine power boost. Just like the other tanks, I'd recommend using it because while 16 horsepower per ton on medium terrain isn't terrible, of course the improved engine power boost is actually very useful still, and with this tank's nice top speed, using this does actually allow you to be quite fast at 58 kilometers per hour, which is very good for a tier 7 medium, even if it is only temporarily. And of course adrenaline, because this tank has pretty nice reload, and adrenaline does just help you to take advantage of that. Provisions are normal, just like the other tanks. And moving to equipment, again, I'd use gun rammer because this tank has got quite nice DPM, and again, if using calibrated shells, it only improves the penetration ever so slightly, and that amount of penetration improvement at tier 7 just really doesn't do too much. Generally, the better DPM is going to do you well, just because tier 7 is a DPM tier, and having that is so helpful for dealing with other high DPM tanks in your tier. Next, engine accelerator. Again, if you think the mobility of this tank, or the traverse speed I should say, of this tank isn't great, use improved control, because on medium terrain its traverse speed is definitely quite noticeable, but then by dropping the engine accelerator you will be just about as fast as the other tutorial tanks, the Sherman EZ8 and the T-34-85 Breakthrough, which neither of those are really that impressive either. So personally for me, I would still go for engine accelerator just to improve that acceleration, and well, the traverse speed I can deal with. Next, improved assembly. Because this tank doesn't really have hull armor and its turret armor mainly relies on angles rather than thickness, so using enhanced armor wouldn't actually do too much for the armor profile of this tank. Next, gun lane drive. Because this tank has very good aim time, I'm min-maxing on that aim time. Of course, if you want to use supercharger, that also works, but at the moment this tank has actually got very good shell velocity on its standard ammo of 1000, but that is a bug, so we'll see if they do actually fix that or not. But either of these could work, but for the moment I'm going with gun lane drive just because this tank has already got very good shell velocity of 1000 meters per second on AP. Next, vertical stabilizer. That's actually wrong. I would recommend refined gun because this tank already does have great aim time, great effective aim time, so improving the dispersion would do this tank well, as out of the three accuracy aspects, dispersion, aim time and gun handling, the dispersion is by far the least impressive at 0.34, so I would use refined gun. Though as you would have seen in the gameplay, I am having vertical stabilizer on, so that is worth noting. Toolbox and consumable delivery system as well for the final equipment pieces. So I do have two battles in this tank to show. The first one is on Copperfield. So on this map there is only me and a SP1C as medium/light tanks, and the enemy have multiple. Unfortunately our SP is AFK, so me going to the C side is a little bit of a risk, as I'm not sure if I will have the support of that SP. However, I see the Juto coming, so it gives me a bit of reassurance that I will have some support at base C. But also, considering this tank is top tier and I have very nice DPM for facing tier 6s, I'm not too concerned. You'll also see, of course, the good aim time and gun handling of this tank. Again, I meant to be using refined gun, but I am not. I forgot, because I usually default to the stabilizer. But here you can see a Hellcat. I do, of course, try to use the HE because this tank has amazing HE damage of 330, but unfortunately it hits the track. But there you can see, that one goes in, does a full 330 damage on him, and now he's down to a 2-shot. Another miss, unfortunately, but we do finish him off with AP in the end. Now you can see the enemies are all over at base A, so here I'm going to get to fully use the DPM to farm on the Tiger. Now 2446 DPM in tier 7 is quite good, however it's not the best it could be for a gun of this type. For example, the Rudy has 2600 DPM, which is around 150 more than this one. But still, for a free tank, this one actually has quite a nice gun, decent mobility and decent armor profile. It's a general holistic medium tank at tier 7 and it is pretty nice. So here the IS-2 shielded is in the middle, so I'm going to get a side shot on him. And considering my Juto misses, I'm going to finish him off. But now you can see I've activated the improved engine power boost just to be able to get up this hill quickly and support my allies, well, farm up the last little bit of damage. You can see I do try to take an on-move shot, but it doesn't quite work out. And here you'll see 220 damage on the Annihilator. This tank, of course, with its 210 compared to the usual 200 of other tanks, it does actually make a difference for those shots where you get 220 or 190, as just the higher alpha of 10 does actually make a fair bit of difference on this vehicle. And it is noticeable if you do play tanks like the Rudy or the T-43 quite a bit. But you can see 2,450 damage, making 49,000 credits for that first class mastery. But the next battle is on Faust. This one I just played a few moments ago. And it does show the tank's traits fairly well. So starting off, I'm going to be going towards base A because I'm thinking, oh, there's only one light tank on the enemy team. It's a Bulldog, me and this T-37, and the support of the T-25-2 should be no problem to, well, deal with the A side. So you can see I am getting into position. Even on medium terrain, this tank, you can see it's not quite as slow as the T-34-85 Breakthrough or the Sherman EZ-8. And the top speed of 54 is a noticeable upgrade over the 49 that the Breakthrough has. However, of course, for this tank you do have to remember your armour isn't nearly as effective in a top tier match, so you do trade off a little bit to be able to have that better mobility, at least in the top tier match. So here you can see against the Juno, it does have quite a bit of armour, and my penetration isn't that impressive at 147 on standard ammo, so I do use the premium ammo. But now, with all the enemies on this side, I do activate that engine power boost to run away. And you'll see that with it on, I am actually able to go up to 63 going downhill, so it is actually quite nice to have. And you can see here, this is a big advantage of having that 54 km/h top speed compared to the 49 that the T-34-85 Breakthrough has, as I'm just able to run away a bit faster. But now we are down 3 tanks, which is unfortunate, as it means it's going to be very difficult to be winning this battle, and it doesn't really seem like our 3 tanks that have died have done all that much damage, as most enemies are on full HP. But here you can see the mobility does allow me to completely escape the enemies, and I am going to sort of regroup with my allies back over behind base B. You can see I did try to go for the HE there, of course trying to use the HE as much as possible on this tank because 330 damage is very impressive for having 210 on standard ammo. I do unfortunately take a big shot from that SU-100, but you can also see here the low penetration of my premium ammo does mean I can't go through the front of that Jagdpanther. However, with the good aim time of this tank, I'm easily able to aim in on his roof, which I can actually overmatch. But then again, the Juno showing up, so I have to use premium ammo to go through his front. Luckily though, the turret does hold up. The SU-100 bounces off my turret, and now I'm going to try and deal with the Juno, who also luckily bounces off either my very angled upper plate or the turret front. SU misses, and I manage to get in another shot, and here you can see sort of the nice alpha damage DPM combination that this tank has. Maybe not as nice as some other tanks in tier 7, but 210 with 2446 DPM is pretty good. So the BZ, with all his hit points, does rush forward, so I heard him get shot, so I do decide to try and put a shot into the SU-100. Unfortunately though, it misses. That could be that dispersion there, and had I been using refined gun, it may have hit the SU. But here, now I'm just trying to get the final few shots of the game before that BZ inevitably goes down. Considering the SU killed him, I do try to get another shot into him, and then one more into the hands too, but not quite able to. But you can still see in that game, the gun did work really well. I was able to fully use the DPM, and the alpha damage did actually work out in killing some of those tanks which were around 200 hit points. But you can see 2,747 damage dealt, 1,150 blocked on the turret, which was pretty nice, pretty lucky. Of course, this tank's turret is actually quite good, so it does work out, and 35,000 credits, which is still not bad for a loss. But yeah, the Type 58-5008, this is going to be the first one available out of these 4 tutorial tanks, and it's one of the better ones out of these 4. Again, ranking them, I'd say the Tiger Frontline is the best one, just because it has the best performance in tier 6 and 7, and it can still perform against tier 8. The Type 58-5008 I'd say is the next best one, because this one has consistent performance between tiers 6 to 7 and then 7 to 8, just because it doesn't have to trade out its gun and mobility stats for armor. And then next, the Breakthrough, which does exactly that. It trades out gun and mobility stats for armor, but it does make it very nice and enjoyable to play in a top tier matchup. And arguably it would have done better in that previous game, because I would have been able to bounce tanks such as the Bulldog quite easily, or that IS-2 when I was using some of the gun depression. And then lastly, the Sherman Easy 8, which just really doesn't really have much in terms of redeeming features. But yeah, the Type 58-5008 is going to be the first one available, and it is a pretty good one. Just to reiterate, these tanks do only sell for 500 gold, so it isn't really worth getting rid of them. You may as well just keep it in your garage, and this tank actually isn't bad at all, so really you might want to just keep it and maybe take it out occasionally to play for fun or in some game modes, as these 4 tanks do actually have different abilities in game modes, even the ones that seem almost very similar to each other. But yeah, that is it for, well, this is the last video out of the ones I'm making. That is it for these 4 tutorial tanks. They will be all completely free in June, and they are worth getting, at least for collection. And at least 2 or 3 of these out of these tanks are fairly unique or good vehicles to play. But yeah, that is it for the Type 58-5008. Thanks for watching.